Very much. So welcome to Pakistan Dreaming for the ones who have just joined, pardon me. First, a little thank you to the sponsors, PDF Butler, R2, and of course Salesforce with the Trailblazer community. For the ones that were not in for a session, let me introduce myself. My name is Eric Praud. I have been working in the Salesforce ecosystem for the past 13 years. I am also a Salesforce Answers leader, and I've had the privilege of being a Salesforce MVP for the past 3 years. In my previous life, I worked in catering, and I can still make a very mean dessert. And as you can see today, we're going to talk about formulas. I'm going to give you some tips and tricks about them. So first, presenting about formulas is a very broad topic. So I decided to go with a few tips and tricks, and I hope they will help you. One thing I want to make clear today is not about giving you long examples of complicated formulas like the one on the screen now. Formulas can be in many different places in Salesforce. So you have formula fields, default values for custom fields, in flows, validation rules, reports, etc. Most of the principle I will speak about apply to all of the above, and I'll try to flag it if it doesn't apply to a specific feature. So first, let's talk about the greatest formula ever. It's called the power of one. It was made popular by Tim Robbins. It is a very simple number formula field that only consists of typing the number 1 in the formula box. That's it, nothing else, just 1. I recommend having 1 on every object. This formula will help you with reports, mostly cross-object reports, when the record count is not on the object that you need. For example, the number of opportunities that use a specific product when running an opportunity with products report. You can also see how it can be handy in the report in the screenshot, where I can now see how many accounts and how many opportunities are owned by whom. We can see that the report was already giving me a record count on opportunities only. Thanks to the power of 1, I can also have the record count on accounts. You can now use the unique function in summary formulas, or you can also show the unique count. It kind of works the same way as the power of 1, pardon me, but it's not always available. The same principle applies if you want to count the number of records with specifics. For example, here I've got an example that shows the record count of accounts where the type pick list is set to new customer. So any other account will count as 0, but those accounts will count as 1. When building a formula, find a pattern. Every formula has a pattern behind it. Some are easier to find than others, but there will always be one. So try to rephrase the requirement using the word every. For example, clocks go back every last Sunday in October and forward every last Sunday in March, at least in Europe. By doing so, by using this every word, you'll find the pattern and therefore the logic behind the formula. To me, that's 1/3 of the formula writing process. First, you find the logic, then you think on how to apply the logic in a formula, and finally, you write and test the formula. Salesforce gives you a few ways to help you writing formulas. Make sure you use them. They're all, well, not all, but a lot of them are here circled in red. So many times I see issues with formulas that could have easily been avoided by using one or several of those features. For example, when writing a report formula, always use the left-hand side panel to insert the fields. Just like you need to use the insert field button when writing a formula field or validation rules, or insert a resource when writing a flow formula. Don't forget to check the functions when writing a formula field or validation rule. You even have a link to the help and training article when selecting a function, and it will redirect you to this specific function with usually an example and obviously an explanation as to what it does. Ask a friend. There is plenty of help online. Don't hesitate to make use of it. The most obvious ones are the Salesforce help and training. And by the way, I recommend you check a help and training called Formula FAQ, where there's plenty of tips there. There's another obvious one is the Answers community, but there's also plenty of material in non-official pages. Don't forget that Google is your friend. Google, like if you get an error, for example, Google the error, write Salesforce, the error message you get, and more than likely you'll find a solution. There's also plenty of blogs out there, for example, Automation Champion, and many more. I now want to talk about date or date and time formulas. They can get very tricky very fast. One of the main reasons for it is that dates and times are returned in GMT. Therefore, if you are not in the GMT time zone, your results may be off by a day or a few hours, depending. You can offset the result by adding or subtracting the difference between your time zone and GMT. However, this doesn't take daylight savings into account, and this only applies to one time zone. I actually wrote an article not so long ago about daylight savings and date and time formulas. There's a few formulas there that can help you, but again, for one time zone only. Also, have a look at a Salesforce help and training article called Sample Date Formulas. There are some real gems there. For example, how to calculate which quarter a date is in. Finally, I wanted to discuss the difference between add month and month with a date plus a number. So in my example here, adding 1 month to a date. Remember that the month function returns a number, 1 for January, 2 for February, etc. until 12 for December. So now, if your formula returns a number greater than 12, so let's say I have a date in December and I want to add 1 month. So I use the second formula, month, my date in December plus 1. It will result in an error. And the reason for it is that there is no month 13. So in order to circumvent that, you have to use the add month function. It will not error out and is therefore preferred. As a bonus, in the tip there, I've added a date formula using the add month function to return the last day of the month of a date field. So what I do, I just take the first of the month of the date field and the year of the date field. I add 1 month to it. So let's just take an example. I'll take the 1st of January 2023. I add 1 month, which brings it to the 1st of February 2023. And the -1 removes 1 day, which will give me, the 31st of January 2023. How about report formulas? So reports now have 2 kinds of formulas. You can create a row level formula, and those act like a formula field. However, you can only use 1 per report, and there are a few limitations as to when you can use them. For example, you cannot use them on a report type. On a report type with an object with or without another object. Also, some functions that are common in a formula field are not available, and it can only return a number, a date time, or text. All of this is documented in a Salesforce help and training article. It's called row level formula limitations. Also, a row level formula cannot be reused in another report. You would actually need to write it again in the newer report. So if you know you will reuse a row level formula, it may be a better idea to create a formula field on the object, so you can now use this field in multiple reports. The second type of formulas in a report are called summary formulas. They can calculate a numerical value at a grouping level. These formulas can be a bit tricky to get used to be honest, but they can be very powerful. They're often used to display a percentage of a total at a grouping level, or for comparison between groupings, for example, in a year-on-year calculation, when the report is grouped by year. There are also two specific functions to summary formulas. That is the only place you will find them. They're called parent group val and prev group val. If you look at the screenshot, you can see that parent group val takes the value of the current grouping. Here I use the row count, the record count, whereas prev group val takes the value of a previous grouping. So by default is the grouping before, but you can compare up to 12 groupings apart. Also, any numerical column can be summarized by returning the sum, minimum, maximum, average, or median. It usually defaults to sum, but if you want to change it, just click on the arrow pointing down on the column or double click on the field on the left-hand side panel, and you can select the necessary summary function. And finally, another little tip for our reports formulas: do not forget about the power of one formula that I spoke about in one of my first slides. Here's something that quite a few people are unaware of. The $sign references the logged in user in a formula. It can be very handy in a few scenarios, like excluding a specific role, profile, or user in a validation rule, or maybe having a checkbox formula used as a filter in list views or reports. For example, if you want a list view of your subordinate records, you can create an is manager checkbox as per the tips there, and filter then your list view with the checkbox formula equals to true. I'm also giving you an example here to exclude a specific role in a validation rule, so it applies to everyone except any user in the CEO role. All right, here's a big pet peeve of mine. Formula fields cannot trigger automations. I will repeat it because it's very important. Formula fields cannot trigger automations unless it's a scheduled automation, so scheduled Apex or scheduled flow. It's very important to remember that. The thing with formulas and automation is this: automations run only when there is a change to a record or on a schedule, as I said, but that's a bit separate. On the other hand, formula values are not saved on the record. They actually are not saved anywhere. They are calculated each time you look at them or you use them. This means that a change in a formula is not an update on a record and therefore will not trigger an automation. There are ways to go around the issue. Maybe you can simply recreate the formula as an entry criteria, if we're talking about flows. Or again, talking about flows, maybe we can use schedule path or schedule triggered flows when your formula has a dynamic date, for example, when the result changes depending on the dynamic date, like today. I'll do a poll after to see if people remember formula fields cannot trigger automations. Okay. Now, let me give you a few tricks to work with validation rules. You're probably familiar with validation rules in Salesforce. They return an error when the result of a formula returns true. Well, now you can also add validation rules to fields in a screen flow. However, the formula needs to return false for the error message to display. It is counterintuitive for most admins, but you get used to it. So here's an example in the slide here. If you don't want to be able to enter more than 500 in a number field, a standard validation rule would be number field greater than 500, whereas the validation in your flow should be the number variable less than or equal to 500. Bear in mind also that you cannot check if a field is blank in a flow validation. As per the Salesforce help and training, you need to make a field required if you want to validate whether it is blank. This makes it very difficult when you want to validate if the field is blank under certain conditions. One workaround is to have a display text component with your error message that is visible only when a Boolean variable is true. Straight after your screen, you add a decision to check if a field is blank and any other conditions as per your requirement. If the outcome is not fulfilled, then the decision would go to an assignment that would set the Boolean variable to true, and then back to your screen. If the field passes the validation, you simply continue on with your flow. As a side note, there are also some functions that are only available for standard validation rules, like VLOOKUP, isChanged, and prior value. There's others like isNew, pardon me. IsChanged and prior value, by the way, can isChanged and prior value will only trigger on edit, not on creation. Right, common errors, we've all been there. Rewrite a formula. We try to validate the syntax or we try to save and we get an error message. As I said before, I would recommend you Google the error. 99% of the time you'll find your answer. But let me explain the common ones that are on this slide. So the first one where we're missing a bracket. First, obviously check that you have the same number of opened and closed brackets. If you're 100% sure you've got the right number, this error usually means there is actually a comma missing. It's a bit counterintuitive, but most of the time it's a comma. Wrong data type. Well, make sure you select the right formula return type for your formula. In the example here, it would mean that your return type is set to text, but the formula returns a number, like it results in a number. Therefore, you need to select number as the formula return type, or make sure your formula returns text, whichever is needed. Compiled formula error, we've all got that. Just try to reduce the formula as much as possible. Maybe you're not using the right function. For example, instead of a nested if formula, maybe you can use the case function, which will shorten the formula. This error can also happen when referring to another formula field in the formula that's throwing the error. So maybe you can actually reduce the first formula instead of the one you're working on. If you cannot see a way to reduce a formula, you can maybe split it in two. Then use a record triggered flow to update a field with the first half of the formula and a formula field that will refer to this first field for the second part of the formula. The incorrect number of parameters, make sure you have an else result if using an if or case formula. The else result is simply what the formula should return if your if statement returns false. Then we have, pardon me, the field does not exist. Please as I said before, use the insert field button. If the field is not there, it is not available for a formula. There are two fields that are not shown in there on activity. I can't remember, I think it's the due date and another one. But otherwise, if the field is not there, it's just not possible to use it in a formula. It could also be that the field API has been mistyped. Again, use the insert field button and you won't get this error. A quick note about this specific screenshot, like the last one. It is from a field default value formula. So what this error actually is saying is that default values are only available on creation of a record. At that point, no field has any value until the record is saved. Therefore, hence why you cannot reference any field on the record itself for a default value formula. Okay, just a few tips here. First, I want to point out that this meme is not mine. It belongs to the great Steve Moe, but I love it, so I had to put it there. So in no particular order, make sure you use the API names of picklist values. Formulas only take API names, not the labels. Avoid hard coding IDs if you can. So instead of user ID, maybe use user.username or user.alias. Keep up with the releases. Sometimes there's new functions that come up, like add month or weekday. Shorten the formulas as much as you can, as I explained, so that if you reference a formula in another formula, you don't get the compiled error. Know your field data types. So if you have a text field, for example, but that only contains numbers, and then you want to use this in a formula returning a number, you need to use the value function as an example. Avoid multi-select picklists. They are horrible, horrible, horrible to work with. They're bad for reporting, but they're even worse for formulas. There's only 3 functions that you can use, and it can be very difficult and very big. Keep a cheat sheet. I've got that. All the hard formulas that I created over the years, they are in a Google Documents, so I can refer to them again and reuse them whenever needed. Checkboxes cannot be blank. A checkbox can have only 2 states. It's true or it's false. I see a lot of people trying to check if a checkbox is blank. That will never happen. As I said early on, is changed like prior value. Those functions only work on edit. So when you create a record, the is changed function will not be considered. And finally, do not mix and or with the symbols for and or. I've seen formulas with the 2 and it can break them. Sometimes they just don't work as expected. So choose one or the other. And finally,
Interrupting you, Eric, just to have a soft reminder, we just have 3 to 4 minutes left, so we need to wrap
yep,
up.
that's my last slide. So that's perfect.
Okay.
So here, then, I just wanted to let everyone know we all fail. Don't be afraid to fail. We all do, and failing is a great way to learn. So thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming to this session. I hope I did not bore you too much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.